Let's start now with the discussion to this paper. Professor Popolo.
Thank you, Paul, for that paper. It was interesting to hear the report from Hong Kong in particular, and your account of the social media. So I have one question that relates to the predictions of the alternative media of the elections based on the new media. And my question is how they were able to do that when the dominance of a view in the new media is really self-selected. It isn't a random sample. So you don't know how representative it is.
So your question is, in the mass media, the views are not representative, and how do we know it? Or
No, well, so I know that the polls, public opinion polls, that used to be more representative are much less so now. So I can understand why the mass media that relied on those polls got it wrong. But using the alternative media, Twitter, for example, you don't know how representative those tweets are that supported Trump. So I don't know how you conclude, I'm not sure how they concluded that this was a general sentiment.
Well, thank you. That's a very important question. Now, in fact, nowadays, the public opinion polls, there are two major kinds. One is the traditional one. Mostly, they will use telephone interview, all right, to call a representative sample, all right, and then seek for their views. But the other kind is to focus on the social media, but basically, they would not interview those people. They would just examine all the postings to a particular candidate, for example, during the election, and see their sentiment. Exactly is the sentiment. How many likes, how many angry face, So through this kind of sentiment, they sense that, well, whether one candidate would have more support than the other. So in a way, they are not really dealing with so-called representative sample of the whole population. But they, however, would capture a significant segment of the population, all right, through the mass media about their views of their particular candidate. And right now we are at the stage, it's a very interesting transitional stage, where some people's views could be represented in the mass media. However, many other people's views could only be seen in the social media. And now, well, like the Brexit or Donald Trump's victory, you can see that in fact it's marginal. Even the victory of one side over the other is very marginal. However, the mainstream media did not portray the other significant segment, all right, through the social media. So that's why most of people, whether they're elites or masses, if they choose to use only mainstream media, they feel very surprised about the result. So somehow, in fact, the mass media have been misleading the general public about the so-called public opinion because they fail to capture a very significant portion of people's view. All right, did I answer your question?
Monsignor Sanchez Arrondo.
Thank you. I think this is the positive part of this new media of communication. But also this media have a communication and is an instrument of the traffickers of organs and traffic of sex and traffic of, and this new form of slaves. So control we need to do with this, and it's not easy. What solution we can have, because...
Thank you for your question. I think this is a question difficult to answer, except by the lawyers. I think probably there will still be some regulations. And in fact, like in the case of Hong Kong, even though there's no explicit regulation against undesirable content on the internet, however, they will still apply the existing laws, for example, libel or obscenity, on those materials shown on the internet. So there will still be some regulations. However, if it's circulated in the private network, then it's much more difficult. Because it will affect the so-called freedom of information. If you want to regulate it or clean it up just like China, then probably the political system will be a very authoritarian one. So there's a dilemma, and also it has to be a political choice, whether you really want to clean up everything on the internet. Did I answer your question?
Benkler?
Thank you. Well, in fact, to some extent, you can do it, all right? But there's a certain limit. Now, because the new media structure is very interesting. The key word, in fact, for the new media is individuated networking. So, in fact, nowadays, many people call it social networking site, SNS. But in fact, I think the more proper description is individuated networking site. That means, on the one hand, the individual has control. But on the other hand, they could choose to network a lot of outside parties. So this kind of network, once it becomes kind of closed system, then it will be very difficult for the state to monitor or to regulate, all right, unless you use very extreme measures. But that will affect, as I said, the information freedom.
Thank you. Benkler?
Thanks for this talk. A couple of points. One, I think the optimism was higher, or at least more reliably high, before the state and major market actors learned how to manipulate these systems. So that, for example, our colleagues at American University Cairo went back 2 years after the Arab Spring and found that the entire Facebook network has changed because both the military and the Muslim Brotherhood had learned how to come in and become the major sources in Facebook. In our own study of the US election, you had much more disinformation and propaganda coming from Breitbart and Fox News, funded by the Mercers and of a variety of very conservative players, as well as some intervention from RT and Sputnik, suggesting that the networks themselves are being hacked by major sources of power, which undermines this possibility. The second point is certainly what we found very clearly in the US election context is that the shape of the network is fundamentally asymmetric, and that the right wing had a very extreme skew model, where the extreme was very highly connected on social networks, both Twitter and Facebook, whereas the center and the left had a normal distribution of attention that did not get polarized in this way. So I think that at least suggests that it may be more about technical affordances that are then used or not used by political movements, rather than that there's something about the technology that creates the polarization or the fragmentation. I just think that may be helpful in adjusting the maybe tamping down on the optimism, unfortunately.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your comment. In fact, no, you're right. As far as the state and the market do not intervene that much, then we are still optimistic. But once they come in, then probably there will be some difficulties, all right? However, I still consider that new media will have the advantage, unlike the mass media, because basically the mass media is still controlled by the owner, all right? But for the social media or individuated networking sites, quite often you can set up your own site. And you know now, there's, particularly in China today, they start to develop a lot of sites called V-media. V-media in the sense that only just one anchor, and then I will demonstrate something, all right, through the internet. And then if you like my information or like my style of living, just donate $1 to me. all right, then it can become a million, all right, a millionaire, all right. In fact, many, today we call V media. We don't need heavy capital to operate a media site. So in fact, it would not be so pessimistic, even though the state definitely, and also the market would come in, all right? But on the other hand, I think we are just seeing the tip of an iceberg, and there will be a sea change of culture. Well, just earlier, the paper mentioned about sharing, all right? Sharing economics, and now it's just only starting. I still remember at one conference about 10 years ago when we talked about copyright. All right, if someone mentioned, well, what do you think about sharing? No, wow, then all the participants think that, well, you're stealing people's things. Now, but today, particularly among the young people, they really develop some culture difference from our generation. All right, they don't think it's a problem to share things. All right, of course, you may say it's privacy, affecting creativity. Now, for that, I agree. However, something is still developing. The impact of social media is still unfolding. So we are still in we are going to see a very interesting time. Just like previously, we developed mass culture with radio and television. But now with social media, our culture is going to change. You know, that's what I conceive.
Thank you. Vittorio?
Thank you so much for your splendid presentation that shows us that these techniques can be used by very different purposes. I have two questions. The one is traditional political theory, classically expressed, for example, by Carl Schmitt, insisted that in a democracy, being voted into a minority position is only accepted by people as long as they accept that there is a consensus on basic norms. Do you see the danger that this echo chamber effect may lead to the collapse of democracy, even to forms of civil war, because at the end there is no commonality anymore? Second, in 1964, if I remember, Marshall McLuhan published his famous book, Understanding Media. Of course, the central thesis, the medium is a message, is completely exaggerated. The medium is not a message. But what he wanted to say is that the medium influences the message, that the change in the form of communication have radical impacts on the context that can be communicated. And in fact, Twitter is the classical example. If you have to narrow down an analysis to, I think, 140 characters or whatever the limit is, it's not very likely that complex problems can be carried over. Do you see in the changes of the media, of the form of the media, consequences for the nature of problems that can be communicated?
Thank you very much. Your questions are very significant questions, particularly the second one. Let me answer the second one first, all right? McLuhan says media is the message. To some extent, I think it's right, all right? But of course, it's not the determinism, all right? It's not deterministic. However, I can say that in future, this kind of digital media, because they are still being developed, all right, definitely will change some way how we receive our information. For example, just talk about journalism. Now today, a news reporter, if they go out to collect information, all right, they check out the facts and then report it. But today, due to the development of augmented reality or the virtual reality, that kind of thing, today, now, even journalism has shifted somewhat, all right? Don't let the reporter tell you what they see, all right? Simply just let the readers or the audience see what is happening. So in a way, now they don't really talk about so-called different angles of the news or balanced reporting. And there's a theory saying that we should simply just provide all the angles, all right? For example, a murder case, all right? We could work to the details right from the beginning, from different angles, from the murderer's angle, from the victim's angle, all right? You just show it visually from all the angles, all right, to the audience. And then the audience will see what is real, all right? And right now, in fact, it's happening. So definitely, I think it will affect our perception. And furthermore, now we have the so-called big data journalism, another very popular term today. So-called big data journalism, previously people just consider that, well, we simply apply social science technique, all right, to collect information and then report it, all right? And through so-called big data search or data mining, we will discover the linkage between some variables, all right? And then we will say we have a good story. For example, through the police website, you will see a lot of crime areas, but at the same time, you will check out those business. For example, you may discover a lot of bars, all right, pubs, all right, for drinking. Then you may easily associate them, or well, probably because the crime rate is due to that kind of business, all right. And then you may report it, through this kind of so-called data mining. However, people from the engineering background, they don't agree with this kind of association. Now, because unless your database is really complete, all right, you may not be able really to discover the truth. It may simply because you find these two variables linked together. However, if you have another database showing about the buildings, all right, the demographics of the inhabitants, you may find that, well, many of them may be from lower educated class. All right, then in a way, it's not due to that so-called alcoholic business, but it's due to some demographic features of that area. So in a way, journalism is also changing. I think McLuhan really has some farsightedness. The technology really changed some of the message and even our perception, what should be seen and what should not be seen. And then your first question is about echo chamber, whether it will result in disintegration and also whether it will bring harm to democracy. Well, I think I would put it the other way, because even though new media would contribute to the phenomenon of echo chamber. However, if you have a well-established democratic system, if people really can solve their problems and issues at the time, or periodically at least at the time of voting, all right, and particularly if the culture accepts that kind of resolution, then that should not be a problem. Because basically now European countries, they already have partition newspaper. Unlike America, they simply just emphasize objectivity for all the newspaper. However, for French or for Italy, you have particular political parties' paper. So in fact, people already have a kind of echo chamber, all right? But now just exemplify, in the social media. So I think if the democratic system works well, it should not be a problem. Right? Because every time you have a peaceful means to solve your issues by voting. But on the other hand, for those countries, if they don't have a well-established democratic system, civil wars may result.
Thank you. Is there any other question? Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your talk. I found it incredibly interesting. We still, I don't know your thoughts on this, we still are waiting, I feel, for a huge amount of research yet to be revealed on the new generation yet to come into the workforce who've been solely and exclusively exposed to social media. And I would just like to get some of your thoughts on this, really, the impact this is going to have on the workforce in how we design workforce development, and the impact this is going to have on society. Even now we see, certainly in Europe, and I'm not sure in other parts, the amount of pressure the social media is putting on young people. Some young people are being bullied, many being bullied, some are facing extreme degrading on the internet, and others are even committing suicide. Now, these instances obviously are of concern, but I think there's a broader picture here of the impact yet to be discovered. Is social media presenting a tsunami yet to be revealed? Question mark.
You mean a tsunami for
A disaster.
disaster for
Yeah,
what?
for social communication.
Okay. Well, I think social media, well, just like all other kinds of media, it has a negative and positive effect. Just like in the days of 60s and 70s, a lot of study were conducted on the television violence, if we still remember that, and also on movies, all right, movies' impact on people. So there are always pros and cons for media. And I don't think social media is particularly or that worse. Even though from time to time we hear news about bullying, all right, cyberspace bullying, and also fraud, that kind of crimes. However, I don't think it's more serious than, for example, the middle secondary school bullying, all right? And also, school children would also commit suicide because facing the bullies of their colleagues. So in a way, I think social media, in fact, provides a new opportunity more than an undesirable venue for the criminals to gather and then to turn to their own interests. And I would say that social media, in fact, at this stage, provides a very important forum for those who could not express their view in the mainstream media. So those marginalized and also the righteous, you said the righteous, people, righteous have better control of the social media or better skill in manipulating, probably because the righteous, for a long time in the past 2 or 3 decades, are in the minority or marginalized. So they started to look for some alternative mechanism or vehicles for them to express or articulate their opinions. That's why they found out very early social media could serve that function. But I don't know. That's just my guess.
I think it's going to be very exciting in the next 10 years to see.
Yes, very exciting.
To see how it develops.
Well, after the young kids grow up, all right, it will be an entirely different world, I would say, from ours.
Is any other question?
Just a quick one.
Only person who would...
You as invited are not allowed to present questions.
I think
Any other
there is
questions?
another side of the question, a very prolific side of the question. The way you have put things, I think there's only one person in the world who would fully agree with you, and he's called Mark Zuckerman. There is a mass of literature on social media smog, data override, data obesity, go on a slimming data day. But the one thing, I mean, that's out there. Anybody who wants to read it can read it. The one proposition you put forward that I really do want to contest seriously is that anything that happens on social media leads to a social movement or can lead to a social movement. And I think this is simply untrue. The best counterexample I can think of, and at least 3 people in the room who were present at the time, was in January 2015 with the Charlie Hebdo assassinations. And certainly there were 100,000 people out in the Place de la République. Well, I think you would say protesting. I would say being outraged. Because holding your pencil in the air is a sign of protest. It's not the sign of a nascent social movement. And in case I was being biased about this, I thought I'd check this out for 6 months. So I checked out the subscription rates to Charlie Hebdo. And for the month after January, they went up to 30,000. For the 5 months after that, they went systematically down. So yes, people were outraged, horrified. We were, when we woke up that morning. But where did it lead? Nowhere. Not to a social movement against terrorism, not to any counter-movement in favor of free speech. It was just a knee-jerk reaction of outrage, as Manuel Castells called it. But that's not the same thing as a social movement. A social movement is usually slow to grow, sacrificial to its participants. Think of 19th century foundation of trade unions, when you really had to consider, usually as a working man, whether you wanted to have, and let's assume he had a family, largely to support, you had to choose between your duty and responsibility to look after your own family and justice for tomorrow for the working classes. They agonized over that. The trouble with social media is there is no agony whatsoever, and most particularly, no agony to understand. Think of the asylum seeker crisis, extraordinarily complex in terms of the knock-on effects between countries. Ask the average user of social media to place those countries on a map, and they couldn't do it. Ask those people on social media what went viral, to use their dreadful terminology, and they will tell you this one photograph of a dead baby on one of the Dodecanese island beaches, Lesbos, I think. Of course we hate to see dead babies, but asylum seeking isn't just about a photograph. It's about diagnosing the causal mechanisms behind this release of asylum seekers, the intermediary causes that drive them to such acts of desperation as to take unseaworthy boats just to get away, in the full and certain knowledge that many of their neighbors have died in the process. And finally, some assurance, not certainty, there are no guarantees, but some assurance that there's a better life for them at the other side of the Aegean or the Mediterranean than there has been for 99% of them. So social media can be very expressive, but expressivity has one major drawback. It's presentist. And by next morning, next week, it's been displaced by something else. This is what they mean by media smog. And therefore, I just think you're being over-optimistic about this being a public domain, a means towards social movement development, a contribution, a participatory contribution to democracy on the part of those excluded from it. No, they're expressing their feelings, and it has, in most cases, I would argue, but we haven't got a, way of testing this hypothesis, it has no more lasting effect than an outbreak of violence at the end of a football match that went wrong for some reason or another. Sorry, but there is another side to the picture.
Well, thank you. I think I fully agree with you that now, if we use the traditional definition of social movements, then obviously social media Still not up to that stage yet. But on the other hand, Bennett coined a term for this kind of so-called new types of social movement. He called it do-it-yourself, DIY social movements, meaning that there's no centralized organization. They come suddenly and then disperse. And quite often, they don't have long-term impact. So you're right. In fact, that may not be equivalent to the older type of social movements. But on the other hand, I think it still has influence. It still has social impact. For example, the umbrella movement in Hong Kong, it lasted for 79 days. And although it failed to achieve the goals, however, it created a whole young generation becoming rebellious against the Chinese rule. So I would say that it still has some influence.
Okay, thank you.